Hey guys, I hope you're all doing very well. Welcome back to another video. And the future of gaming has me really concerned. Now, what has this brought my attention to? Now, very recently, I read an article that said that the Ubisoft director says gamers will get more comfortable not owning games. And when I read this article, it was a little bit alarming. Owning games has always been something that I'm a strong proponent of. I always like to own games and preserve games for generations. I've always had games I've owned for a long time since the original Xbox era, which at that time I was still wearing nappies, which is crazy to think that someone could play video games in their nappies to this point. And I've always owned games physical media at that time. I would say more recently during the Xbox One, PlayStation 4 era, there has been a more shift towards digital media to physical media, and I was always misconceived of how digital media was always better than physical media. But now I'm getting back on the track of playing physical media. Well, not saying I'm going to shift back to physical to digital, but now I'm in a position where I want physical media to still be preserved, and I want to change my perspective of how I view physical media now than I did a few years ago. Now, before I get more into depths of the article and talk about my opinion on physical and digital media, I find this all ironic. It comes from Ubisoft, a company that hasn't really been developing their games very well, and they're still stuck with the same franchises that they've been using for a long time. I haven't really been playing a Ubisoft game for a while since Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and truthfully, I don't really see anything new that comes from a Ubisoft game anymore. It's literally like if you buy the new Call of Duty game. You get a new Assassin's Creed game, it's literally like the next COD or the next FIFA. So that's kind of the first few things I would say before getting into this. Now, I'm going to read into the article that basically explains all this. A comment from Ubisoft's director of subscriptions, Philippe Tremblay, caused mild upset this week. Pirate everything from Ubisoft. One response demanded, but the hostile reaction might have more to do with general anxiety over the future of game ownership than his actual point, which didn't strike me as surprising or untrue. In an interview with GameIndustry.biz, Tremblay said that for video game subscription plans like Ubisoft Plus and Game Pass to expand, gamers will need to become more comfortable with not owning games, and he implied that this is likely to happen. Consumers got comfortable not owning their CD collection or DVD collection, said Tremblay. That's a transformation that's been a bit slower to happen as gamers grew comfortable in that aspect. You don't lose your progress. If you resume your game at another time, your progress file is still there. That's not been deleted. You don't lose what you've built in the game or your engagement with the game. So it's all about feeling comfortable with not owning your games. Now, from all the sections that I've read from that, I most likely disagree with this 100%. Now, I think the only thing I can really agree on with the sections that I just read out is subscription-based services like Game Pass or Ubisoft Plus. Now, I don't have Ubisoft Plus, so I can't really talk about it. I don't play Ubisoft games, but I do use Game Pass. And my thoughts on Game Pass is pretty good. You can actually get a good amount of games on Game Pass that you can play. There's a variety of games you can pick from. And I think for a lot of people who are new to gaming and never have played games before, using Game Pass is great. You can use the subscription services and just play the games that you can download and just play them that are available. One of my favorite games on Game Pass that I played recently is Lies of P. That is a phenomenal game. And I can see why people will talk about Game Pass and subscription services to allow people to sort of play all these games. But playing all these games, you don't own them. So if they get taken out of Game Pass or their subscription platforms, the only way you could play them again is that you have to buy them. And sometimes you buy them, they're most likely full price. I think Game Pass does give discounts for games that are on there that you can buy, but that's very unlikely. And you shouldn't really rely on deals that come through Xbox's service to promote. You know, when you have aspects like physical media, you'd have another option of buying games at a different price. So this whole thing about subscription services has been a whole thing that's saying, hey, you could debunk on all these games, play them all at once. But reality is that you don't own them. I think if you're new to gaming, that's completely fine. Now, they do talk about the aspect of people are not used to having CDs or DVD collections. And I don't really think that's true. I do think there is still an audience of people that still like to have collections. And collections have become valuable. And to most aspects, collections have got a resale value. And actually, most of these old games that aren't preserved and they only have to be used on a system and a license that they can't reuse again, they actually go for more money. I go to many trade shops now and they have lots of games that they have that are very old, back on the NES, Super Nintendo Entertainment System, N64, etc., that go for lots of money. So this whole idea that, you know, people don't like collections, I don't really think that's true. I think people still prefer having collections still. I want to get into the discussion of why I still think physical media should still exist. Now, for a very long time, I've actually been very strongly advocate and close to digital media. Now, I was really a strong supporter of it, like putting my fist pumps in the air saying, oh my god, it's so much easier just to have all my games on my console that I could access at any time with just a click of a button, and I don't have to put my disc in and have a case full of a collection to have it stored in my room for no good reason. That's how I always thought, and parts of a lot of those things have been very much a misconception. So a lot of the times you have digital games, most of these games you own digitally are always stored within your one account. Now, I don't know whether you could really share games through your account through other accounts, but when you have physical media, like this game, like Elden Ring, for me, one of my best games of all time. And I'm going to explain why I got this on physical media as opposed to digital media. So, if you have a disc game, you can literally just take this game and literally just plug it into any Xbox or your friends, anywhere. It doesn't matter. So, that's really what physical media is. You can literally buy the game, share the game, and do it in your terms. And that is very vital, and that's kind of what it's been for many years, especially when I grew up during the Xbox 360 era. That's what, you know, I used to do with friends. But when you have like a game that's tied to one account, you can't really have that sort of same sort of experience. And most of the time with digital media, you do need the internet. I think for games that are physical media, you don't actually need the internet because a lot of the game data is stored on the disc. So it's pretty much always going to be there, whether you have the internet or not. Now, obviously, there will be updates and patches to a game that does require the internet. But when these discs are printed and when they're out released, they are literally released from the point that the game was made. So you can literally just use those games and play them without the patches or the updates if you really don't want to. One good video that really digs deep into this, and I really recommend you watch it because this really changed my perspective, is Mudahar's video on physical media. And it's a really, really good video. And it really will give you a thought of a second to really change your perspective of it, because it certainly changed my perspective. And he really goes into a really in-depth view of why physical media has to be preserved and still has to be, you know, kept alive, really. And this goes back to the question of why I bought Elden Ring on the disc versus buying it digitally. It's because, well, you have more options and more sale options to buy it. Now, at a time when I bought this game on the Xbox Server Store, it was full price. When I bought a disc version of the game, it was half price. So you have more options that you could actually get games for cheaper, whether they're digital or physical, and it doesn't make a difference, you know? So these are the things that you have to really consider when you buy your games. So I'm now finally going to wrap up my points. So I don't really have any issues of how people could play their games. Whether they buy and own their games physical, buy and own their games digital, play games through subscription services, I really don't have issues. But I think one of the biggest issues is that a lot of games nowadays aren't coming on disc anymore, and there are still games that are still not printed on discs that you still do need the internet connection for. So this is an aspect that has become more of a concern, that a lot of game companies are pushing away from using physical media, and I really do think it's a bit of a really big shame, because I think physical media should exist for reasons that it gives consumers more choice, more options, and it also gives them the options of how they could use and play their games how they like to play it. So, and I also want to wrap up also another point. Also, when you buy your games physical or digital, it doesn't always necessarily mean that physical games will be cheaper than digital. Sometimes they could be same price, but sometimes they could be more expensive, or one or the other. It doesn't really matter. But I always would always be a strong proponent of consumer choice, and I think part of that consumer choice has to be physical media. I don't want to see gaming landscape where everything just becomes digital and just becomes more like a subscription service, like a Netflix or an Amazon Prime. Now, for some that could be good, but I think for a lot of gamers who've had collections for decades, I don't think that's a very good thing at all. And for me, that just kills off preservation completely. So that's about it for this video. And yeah, that's about it. See you later.